Hello and welcome to the AdTech Heroes podcast. This special episode is in partnership with ExchangeWire, and we are in Cannes and streaming live on our Seedtag YouTube channel. Please remember to hit the subscribe button below. So just to start with, a few quick intros. We've got Rachel from ExchangeWire, Ritu from IPG Media Brands, Ben from M6, and Karan from Microsoft Advertising. And the topic of discussion today is breaking stereotypes in advertising. So first of all, great to have you all here today in the heat. But luckily, we've got air conditioning blasting, so we're all feeling good, right? We're all comfortable.
All good. Can I tell you how thankful I am for this air conditioner?
Exactly.
I'm only here for the aircon.
Exactly. That's it. We only came for the aircon.
Gonna drop a puddle of water then, no. But no, thanks to have you all here today. To kind of kick off, really, it'd be great to how's your Cannes experience been so far? So yeah, we'd love to start with you first. Rachel.
This is my first Cannes, if you can believe that. Lots of ad tech people are like, "What? You've never been to Cannes before?" I was going to say you've been in events for like a long time, and been in the ad tech industry for ages, and I've never been to Cannes.
Wow.
I think it is kind of exciting and overwhelming in equal measure. I can't actually fathom the size of it. It's so much bigger than I thought it was going to be. It just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. But yeah, lots of fun experiences so far.
Karen, you've been there a few times. I saw you last year at the Free Will party, so there's probably more parties coming your way this year.
That was a good time. I feel like this year it's a lot busier though. I don't know if you've got that sense as well. I feel like last year it was like the first one back after COVID, and there was still a little bit of like reticence to come. With this year, it's back in full force, and I always forget like where I have to remind myself like how lucky we are to come out here and all the people we meet from the industry in the informal setting, just like sitting around with you guys and having this chat. I think the context of just being in the south of France and doing it just changes the whole conversation, which I think is a really cool thing.
Totally.
Amazing.
It's a privilege.
It's my first time here as well.
Hey,
and I
another
feel
first
exactly
timer.
the same thing. There is so much to do and there are so many people to see and so many things to take part in that, I've loved every second of it so far.
You've seen some of your NFL idols, haven't you?
I have, yes. I'm a massive
Have
NFL
you?
fan, so I was actually here yesterday. Got to meet a few of them, had a chat, and it was really cool. Like, that's like a once in a lifetime experience for me. So, yeah, really, really glad I got to do that.
I think Beckham was hanging around here somewhere as well yesterday, and
I was
a
a
few
little
of the
bit
other
gutted about that
footballers.
one. Didn't get to see Bex.
Would have
And I
you-
missed Shearer the day before, which
Oh, you missed
my
him.
hero. So
Right.
I missed him unfortunately. But
I feel like if I
made
saw
up for it.
famous people, I might sort of mistake them for ad tech people. I'd be like, where do I know? Does he work at Microsoft? No, he's an
We are
NBL
famous
player.
people in
Yeah,
the
we are
industry.
famous. How about you, Rita? You've been in Cannes before?
Uh,
Fourth time. Wow.
Fourth time, yeah. And yeah, I was actually, it's a different energy this year. And I'm as excited as I was the first time, to be honest. Seeing a lot of old faces, like hearing what people have to say about the trends that we read about, how people are interpreting those. So yeah, really, really happy to be here. Very grateful for the wind. It's very windy.
It's extremely windy, right?
Crazy.
When I arrived yesterday morning and the pilot said there's a little easterly breeze, there might be a few bumps as we land. When a pilot says a breeze, obviously they mean 40 knot gale force wind, which is what was happening. Yeah, it's incredible.
And has the 4 years that you've been, has it differed, any of those 4 years? Is it pretty much the same year on year?
I think to your point, last year was definitely more subdued. The first year, there's been a bit of a gap in between. So it's not been 4 years consecutively. Obviously, 2020 was 1 year that not many people obviously didn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think as I've changed in my career, I think the way I respond to Cannes and the sort of connectivity that happens now versus just trying to do a lot, right? Cram a lot in a week. Now I'm less about the parties and more about just seeing old faces in the industry.
Yeah, it must be different. Like it's interesting because I think everyone have a different lens on it. Like coming from our perspective or your perspective in the kind of press event space and agencies and brands.
Yeah.
When you talk to them, they just have a completely different view. And I think everyone's experience of Cannes is just miles apart. So having that conversation and seeing where like what people get from it, it's always something different as well, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think 2 years of the pandemic where all of our meetings were virtual. We didn't get that face-to-face interaction. I think we've been craving it, right? So,
100%.
any reason to get together, discuss the industry we work in, meet old faces, hopefully meet some new. I think yeah, you can't really go wrong with that, can you?
It's irreplaceable, really. And I think that's partly what the pandemic taught us. It was revolutionary in terms of enabling people to work remotely, which has been a great addition to our lives in many respects. But I think it's all reminded us that we can't do without that in-person interaction. Absolutely nothing replaces it.
Definitely. And obviously today we're talking about breaking stereotypes and diversity and inclusion and all the topics around that. Do you think for events like in Cannes, like where we are today, do you see the same types of profiles attending and speaking? Not just Cannes, but yeah, all the events that you've been kind of exposed to?
Well, I guess since this is my first Cannes, I can't compare it to previous years. What I would say, though, in more of a sort of general capacity, I feel as though diversity is much higher up the agenda for every business in the advertising and marketing industry, and that is therefore very gradually being reflected in industry events. So you are starting to see a deliberate effort to create more of a diverse lineup, whether it's in terms of panel speakers, informal sessions, even the way that networking sessions are designed as well. I think they're being designed a little bit more from a slightly different perspective. Back in the old days, it probably always just used to be a car behind the bar and everybody come and have a drink. Not saying that doesn't still happen, but I think there's a few more thoughtful efforts put into, well, actually, how do we create networking environments for people that, aren't drinkers or for people that don't prioritize that way of interacting. And so I think you're starting to see that more generally. Very briefly, from my point of view at ExchangeWire, where we host industry conferences, we have absolutely prioritized making a deliberate effort to get a more diverse lineup of speakers. And also we want to see that reflected in all of the businesses across the industry, because we can't recruit that diverse lineup of speakers if those organizations across the industry aren't recruiting more diversity into their workforce. So I think all of those things are kind of, coming together in a way. I think there's more effort being put in general across events, and then there's more effort being put in general within businesses and organizations to really promote diversity.
Yeah,
it's been called out, right, as well. I think that's
Absolutely.
the great thing about social media. Obviously, it's good and bad things around it, but I think it gets called out, and rightly so. It should be called out if it's a male-only panel, or or from a certain. It doesn't have to just be male, female, the color of your skin, but also the input, right, and how people are going to give their perspective on the topic. And if you've got people all from the same company or from the same experience, I think all the responses are the same. And the panels that I've seen that, in my opinion, have failed are when everyone's in agreement, everyone's agreeing to the exact same thing, and you kind of come away from it a little bit deflated, really, right? So
we don't get the diversity of thought, right? And I think that's the key thing. And I would say, to challenge it a little bit, we do still see the same people, since I've been in programmatic at least, on the same panels, right? Especially at a senior level, and that doesn't change. And a lot of the time they're talking about the same stuff. I think what's really good is we're seeing stuff on the periphery, things around like podcasts that are run within companies, stuff around like some of the events that we do in the industry, like for this one. We're getting that kind of diversity of thought coming through, and we're not going to overnight change who the subject matter experts are. And I don't think we should, in favor of just having diverse panels. What we need to do is start getting the talent through and giving people the opportunity and the platform so they develop that skill set, so they become it, which I don't think has ever happened before. And what has changed, I think, is, when I first started doing like public speaking within the industry, and I know we're talking about diversity today, I was always asked to talk about diversity. And it got to a point where I said, I'm not doing any more panels or anything on diversity, because I don't want to be my own echo chamber for that. I'm also an expert in what I do and bring to the table. And if you want me to be on a panel, I'll be on a panel, but it has to be about something we're doing and bring to the table. And that's what I want to see continue.
It's a good point.
So true. I've had the same experience, and I've been in the industry for 20 plus years now. And I remember the first time when BAME was being set up, and I was asked to, be spokesperson and take part in panels and I remember at that point, I thought to myself, I don't want to be known as just this and flying this flag. And I actually, in some ways, regret it, because I think it needed a voice then as well, as, of course, it's much more accessible, more mainstream. The topic is present and relevant, and it should have been then as well. But I felt Nah, I don't. I want to be known for my work, for the expertise and the experience that I represent within the industry, not just the fact that I'm a woman of an ethnic minority in this industry. So yeah.
Focusing a little bit more on the running of campaigns and activation, in terms of, we know creative, for example, gets a lot of focus when it comes to discussing stereotypes in advertising. But how would you say targeting is, the role that targeting is playing in this? And yeah, over to you, Ben, because obviously you work on the performance side. How would you go about not setting up your targeting of your campaigns and, clicking few buttons to, I'm not saying that's all you do, because I'm sure there's a lot
sitting around
more
your
to
desk
it
clicking a few
than
buttons.
that. How would that strategy play out for you and your team?
I mean, I think there's two sides to it for me, which is there's the human element. There's us, we need to make decisions that, are inclusive, and we have to make the right decisions on that path. But then the automation side, which we have slightly less control over at this stage, there's two elements to that. So the human side, where we look at how we target, if we want to go after specific demographics, what messaging is that? We don't want to be too biased towards one side. We don't want to maximize opportunity on, religious holidays or something like that. Do you know what I mean? It's a very gray area, but we have to do our best as humans every day to try and make sure that we are being as open and as diverse as we can be, and not being so siloed to specific audiences just because of race, gender, age. Another one, there's so many different biases that there can be. We have to always take that into account whenever we do anything.
And Ben, just from your perspective, do you ever challenge clients on the why? So why they're doing it? Because we obviously speak to a lot of brands and they want to be doing the right thing, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes it can come across as maybe less sincere. For me, it's all about defining why you're trying to do it. You can't target anything until you define what you're trying to do. So if you're just trying to do diversity, you're never going to do it well. And we got to the point where we challenge that, and obviously you're at the coalface of that.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself challenging clients on that?
Yeah, sometimes you have to, really, because if it doesn't, clients will always try and tell us where they want to get to, and our job as advertisers to help them get there. But it's not always the right way to do things, and it's our job to make sure that we are pushing back towards them to say, we don't really think this is the right way to do things, or it's against what we believe as a company. It goes against our ethos, this kind of thing. So yeah, fortunately, where I am, we've not had to do that because we work with some brilliant clients who are very open and kind of diverse. But yeah, there are certainly some where you have to have that element of pushback to follow your beliefs.
I think that's a really interesting point though as well, Karen, because it struck me recently that actually I think it's quite common for a lot of brands to feel as though they, understandably, because they put a lot of effort into this, they really know their target audience. They're sure of their target audience. But I sometimes think that actually they might be missing something if they become too granular and too targeted. Even if they're trying to hit a particular demographic, even if they're trying to speak to a more diverse audience or a more minority-led audience, one of the ways to do that surely is to actually open up your view of targeting rather than going down a very specific channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find yourself having those sorts of conversations sometimes with brands too?
Yeah, exactly, because everything's based on creative, right? But you don't want creative to be stereotypical or something like that, and you don't want to say this creative is going to work with this specific audience because of all these implications that we've put in place. Sometimes we just have to be broader because we don't want to, make things too specific for someone. We need to, because it's our job to make targeting quite specific. But again, that human element has to come in where we think, is this right? Is this the right thing to do?
The point around clients, we always encourage our clients to invest in the research, right? So to your point, it starts with good segmentation studies that represent who the different attitudes, behaviors of our audiences are. And then, however, what we find is we want to fast forward to addressable. We want to fast forward to actually reaching them, right? Because what we develop in the investment and the research that we do to represent, beyond gender, beyond just very basic demographical kind of breakdowns, which are important, but they're not the key decider of targeting, is they want to sort of skip forward to how do we get them. And each platform's obviously got their own capabilities around who they can target. But, personalization is a big thing where, there's a lot of clients that are very keen on getting super hyper targeted about individuals but in this instance, sometimes they don't want to hear this, but it's sometimes about finding the commonalities as well, right? Like the thing that brings us together, not the thing that differentiates us, which is sort of flipping it, I guess, to some degree. So I think, more investment in good research at the foundations. To your point, we need to look at continue to hiring the right influential people within the organizations, so that they have that thought process and say, yeah, like we need to invest in more because we don't have a full understanding or grasp of who our audiences are when we're spending media dollars to reach them.
Yeah, I think the research bit is really crucial because, we're all of Indian origin. The lazy way to do it is to go and find, like a media outlet that typically would target them. But I can speak for myself and say I don't consume any of those.
Yeah.
So you're never going to target me as a consumer there. It's a very broad brush tick box way of doing it. Whereas once you got the research and the word you use is commonality, which I think is key, right? Like commonality is not just based on like how similar we are from an ethnic background or gender or anything like that. It's more around us as individuals, the passions, interests that we've got, and actually doing it that way. And that's where the creative does become so important, because the creative is the one the vehicle that's used to engage. The targeting needs to be done in the same way that you target any group. It needs to be done smart to drive performance, to get in front of our eyeballs, and then come across with that meaningful message, which is not always done well. I'm sure you guys see that all the time. Yeah. But is it in some instances?
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, and if you think about it from the brand points of view, the whole point is to try to get your brand out to as many potential customers as possible. And how can you possibly know all of who those customers are? Because if they're interest-based products, there could be people with a completely different, two people with completely different demographic profiles. So I just think that's a much more powerful way to look at it from a brand perspective. Yeah. And perhaps that gets baked into the creative process as well, rather than, I know who my target audience is, or I know who my target customer is. Imagine your target audience is everyone. Imagine your product could be sold to everyone. How would you then like to design your creatives? How would you then like to engage with people?
Such a good point. Like, how does that data, in terms of the way we target in a performance data, go back into creative development and messaging development? And it's still something we're really challenged with, right? We just can't, we talk about real-time insights being pumped back into campaign optimizations and then therefore pumped back into messaging. We're not doing it quick enough. Like it's still not nowhere near where it needs to be.
I think a great example, I don't know if any of you remember the Tesco ad around Ramadan. I think it was last year, and I think it was great because taking a step back, you would have thought, the creative ticks all the boxes, obviously around Ramadan and fasting, and one would take a step back and think the targeting is then focusing on those Indian channels and, our parents, our grandparents who have, always watched these shows, these Indian TV shows and the Indian channels. And that's where they would do the targeting. But it wasn't the case. It was on mainstream TV. And I think that's where they got it right, because they had the creative. It was super relevant. They weren't trying too hard in the ad. But then also, earlier to your point, Karen, they were targeting the mass audience, if that makes sense. So I think they did it brilliantly, and hopefully we'll see more of those cases. And I know with Diwali coming up, end of the year, we do see some ads here and there. But maybe they can take some learnings from Tesco in that front. Also, in the lead up to Pride Month, we know there were some brands, I won't name names, but they faced a backlash to LGBTQ themed messaging. Do you guys feel that brands are damned if they do and damned if they don't? I'll start off with you, Karen, seeing as I'm looking at you.
I think they're damned if they're not sincere. So I think it comes through really clear when a brand is doing something for tick box and it's not bled through their organization. I think for a business, you need to see it in the culture of the business, and consumers are so savvy now to that. Like there was a stat, I think in Norway, where something like 60% of consumers of that younger generation will only buy from brands where their beliefs are the same. And that's not just in their advertising. You can say what you want. It has to be in your leadership, has to be in your CSR policies. And I think the example that you talk about seemed like it was, how do we just capture this brand new audience, but do nothing else? And actually, what they've done is alienate potentially two different audiences by being really, insincere with their efforts. And I think brands have to take an inward look at why they're doing it. And it's the reason why I asked you the question around, do you challenge clients around why? Like, the first question we ask is, define to us what D&I inclusivity means. Do you want to support businesses with 51% female leadership? Do you want to support minority consumed media or owned media? Do you want to support, businesses who have, a path into accessibility? Like, what does that mean to you? You can't just say we're doing D&I. And I think the brands that fall down are the ones that they just want to do it, and they do it badly. And then there's absolutely no point, because you're just doing more damage to your brand than good, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it comes... I think there can be a thin line between we're doing this for the right reasons and we're doing this for commercial purposes. And I think that's where some of the brands we know about, that's where they fell short, was they didn't really follow through, which shows that it's not ingrained in their businesses. It's maybe not something they really believe in. For me, it's what brands do outside of Pride Month that really shows what's ingrained within them internally. I think that shows a lot about who you are, what you are as a business. This isn't a 1 month and done thing. It's like dogs just not for Christmas, right? It's the same kind of thing. We don't just do Pride Month from a commercial point of view. It should be ingrained throughout every single business and from the top down as well. Everyone should have those similar beliefs. And
it shouldn't be just left to one person or one team, right? I think it needs to be, everyone needs to be providing their input. And like you said, it needs to be an ongoing aspect. And it needs to be in our daily lives, right? And, we need to be teaching and learning and educating as we go on as well.
Absolutely. And I think, building on the points that you guys have made, I think the first pillar really is authenticity. If you are not putting out an authentic message, then you're going to be, exposed pretty quickly. And I think that was absolutely scooped up in the examples of brands trying to activate during Pride Month. And then I think the second thing is that you've got to have a really solid strategic approach to this, which is, as you've both alluded to, incorporated in everything that you do, because those two things link together, right? You can't have an authentic message if you don't understand why you're putting this messaging out there in the first instance, or it's not very well thought through from a strategic point of view. And then I think the other thing is, picking up a bit on what you're saying there, Dal, is I think that I hope, anyway, it's my hope, especially to this podcast, my fellow podcasters who are parents of young children, I hope that we're going to live in a world where all of the prejudices that exist around things like LGBTQ plus issues are just perforated, and they don't exist in another 10, 15 years' time, because kids have been used to being brought up and educated in environments where those prejudices are battered down on a daily basis. And that will then be reflected in the way that we consume products and the way that we market and the way that we understand the world. And I hope that happens with lots of other matters of diversity as well. And because I feel as though, as businesses and companies and organizations within the industry, we're all trying to do that within our own companies. And I hope that it becomes a collective effort down the line, and things get a lot, that messaging and that marketing just naturally gets a lot more authentic.
Being slightly contentious. How
unlike you, Karen.
Unlike me. We also, like, this is personal views. I don't want to see it go too far the other way. Like, for me, advertising especially should be a reflection of society. So I live in London, so I see my reality, and I want that reflected in the advertising. I don't want every single creative to be based around stuff like that is trying to be so diverse that it actually loses the reality of what things look like. So, and
that would move away from the authenticity anyway, right? That's what I mean by authenticity.
Because it's not authentic. It's completely artificial. It's not what I see day to day. And actually, I think you can quickly go to that place and have to rewind back, because from an ethnic minority standpoint, we want to see representation, right? Representation means like representative of what I see in my daily life. I want it to look like my daily life.
And that's improving, right? Because, growing up as, a 10-year-old watching TV, you'd all see the same. You wouldn't see someone
you wouldn't see a representation of your communities,
as a lead
right?
character on a TV show or a movie or an ad or anything like that. And I think that's changing. And that, going back to your earlier point, is, it's up to us to then, build that for our children and the generations below, after us, because I think that will then hopefully change. And it's, there's that innocence from a child, right? So if I ask my daughter to explain, or tell me, who your best friend is and to point them out. She'll never talk about is that person of that ethnicity or, how they look. It's more so, oh yeah, that boy that's done this, or, it's so innocent, but we need to keep that innocence, right? Because it then it goes to the whole nature nurture debate. Of course, it's all nurture, right? If we're instilling certain things, behaviors to our children, then they're just going to make the same mistakes that our generation made as well.
I think, the ethics of what we're discussing today are out there, and we can have lots of dinner party discussions and podcasts about representation and diversity, but ultimately the organizations, the industry that we work in, it's got to be linked back to business goals as well. And everyone knows it's the right thing to do, but the point around commerciality, connecting it back to the bottom line and goals and measurement and all that sort of thing, it has been proven, like the headlines need to match the numbers that we're seeing, right? And I think Deloitte's actually released a report not long ago around the impact of making those changes in your organization or in your campaigns has had on profitability, on revenue, on creativity and great ideas. So it's this conversation is connected to strong business results, not just a brand doing it for the sake of it to sell shampoo or beer bottles and so on. So I think it's good to remind ourselves that there is a payback for making those decisions in your organization.
It needs to be represented in the products as well. And the bit you got me thinking about that around, like, my daughter's 3, and she was choosing like a doll. And back in my day, you had a choice of white or white, and that doesn't look like her. And she's mixed race, so there was a choice of like 10, and she just picked the 2 that look most like her friends. So there's no bias there, but she had the product choice. And the same thing we're seeing now, which I think is really promising, is not just the advertising, but when we look at like Band-Aids, and they brought out bandages in different colors, or Fenty, the makeup brand that Rihanna brought out. The reason it's valued, where it's valued, is the shades of color that she's been able to bring to the market. So if you're advertising like that, but you don't have the products, that's one fast way to be inauthentic. And I think when, our kids grow up and the next generation grow up, I think they'll have so much more choice in what they buy. And that's what I'd love to see carry on and flow through, is that translating into business goals around the products and what consumers want. You create the need with advertising, but then you have to service that need. And we're starting to see that now.
Yeah.
Definitely. You mentioned a few examples there, Karen, but for the rest of you, have you seen good uses or good cases of D&I, whether it's brands, whether it's events? It'd be great to understand.
Mattel is actually a client of ours, and obviously the Barbie campaign. There's been it's so exciting to see the steps that a company like Mattel, a really old legacy company in that space of toys and gaming and so forth, are doing to change perceptions at that age level, right? So that is the future, and I think. So I think what they've done is brilliant. I think there's an example of a campaign that L'Oreal did, actually. And L'Oreal get a lot of stick. They've had a lot of stick in the past. Because obviously the beauty industry has not always been so representative of age. There's a lot of ageism that goes on. And sizes, shapes, we've seen that. And it's definitely changing massively. I think L'Oreal have been at the forefront of that. And there was a campaign that we did, it was McCann Paris and McCann London, which was with Vogue, and you might have seen it. And the reason why I use that example so it was to basically address the topic of ageism within the beauty industry. And they took over Vogue, and Jane Fonda was on the front cover. It was called The Non-Issue was the campaign, and it was done. It's 2019, so it's what's brilliant about that campaign is that it changed. Like Vogue has since then, had a lot of older women being on the front cover representing the beauty industry, and I've seen it change so much in such a small short space of time. I think that's a really good example. And there was one that Unilever did where they again took the inward approach, where they changed, they looked at the diversity that their team represented. So everyone did like DNA tests and to see what their background actually was and learn more about how diverse they were as individuals, to then to start to really have this idea about what they need to change about where they develop creatives or campaigns and so on. So I thought those were quite clever.
Yeah, nice. So L'Oreal's been a great example. Mattel's been a great example.
L'Oreal, Mattel, Unilever are really good at getting that through.
Nice.
Yeah, from my side, at M6, we work with Fossil Group, who they have their own range of Pride watches they release every single year. Some of their bestsellers really, really good. But what's kind of ingrained within them internally is I work with them very closely, so I know what their perception on diversity is, and it's very, very good. It's exactly what matches us as an agency, which is why we work so well together. But all of the proceeds from everything they sell within those collections go towards LGBTQ plus charities. So, you know, it's not really just kind of a one-off thing. I know that it's really ingrained in them and in their business ethics and what they do. As far as agency side, we have something at M6, as we are a part of Group M and WPP, something called WPP Unite. And that's led by a guy I work very closely with, a guy you know, Alex Montero. And he is, at the forefront of this, and it's all around raising awareness around what it's like within media to be part of the LGBTQ community. They've just released a recent piece of data around what the current landscape is for that specific, group LGBTQ, how they're represented within media. And it's fascinating. It's called Beyond the Rainbow. It's really, really good. And there is just so much data around how much more work there still is to do. We are doing what we can, but there's still a lot more that we need to do every day. And it's great. It really creates the path for where we need to move forward.
I think that's entirely true. There's still so much more for us to do, but I find it really interesting that we're at a period of time, I would say, in history in the marketing and advertising industry where you're seeing some really exciting and interesting initiatives being driven at the top, at the C-suite of quite large organizations, including agency holdcos. Some of the larger AdTech companies that we work with are getting really interesting as well because they're thinking much more strategically about these approaches. I was thinking that more or sort of when we think more about use and application of data in tech and agency supporting clients, I wanted to give a bit of a shout out to the Brand Advance Group, who are a really interesting sort of independent agency that also use data products to work together with specific brands to enable them to try to actually speak directly to and target minority audiences. But they're also working on the other side of the piece too, which is working together with brands who maybe want to make sure that their investment is going to particular media outlets. So they maybe might have some sustainability goals that they want to hit, or they might feel really passionately about minority-owned media outlets, and they want to know where those media investment dollars are going. And Brand Advance Group sort of are trying to help out on both sides of the coin there, which I find really interesting.
They're full circle, aren't they? So they've got creative side, they've got their own SSP, they've got their publisher relationship. So I think that's the key, isn't it? Because you're not just focusing on one element, because then I suppose the chain gets broken somewhere. And it's then, working with a brand on all those aspects. I think that's key as well.
And I also just think it's an example of a company that I just don't think we would have seen in the industry as little as 5 years ago. And now I just think we're really starting to see some concerted efforts come out across the industry.
Yeah, well, they're like a prime example of a facilitator of doing it. Like 5 years ago, the CSR plans would have looked the same. The difference is the media plan would have been the media plan, and the D&I would have been nice to have at the end. What we see now when we speak to brands, and again, you guys will see this more than me, is D&I is core. It's like, and it's KPI'd, which is like, we need 10% of our spend. Our global team has said 10% of our spend is mandated. It has to go to, and Brand Advance is a facilitator of that, because the bit that was frustrating me, like a couple of years ago, and this is, everyone's talking about it, the execution is so hard to actually do that, to define it, to kind of find that, and then get the scale, because there is the business objectives at the end of this, which is you have to deliver results. And for me, like that execution bit is now getting to a place where it's not perfect. We need more, but it's at least something that's progressed to a point where brands can actually act on what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm. And just on that, so we talked about targeting, we've talked about a little bit on creative and brands that have done a great job. But now, especially in the advertising industry we all work in, technology plays a big part. So my question is, are there biases in our technology? And before you guys answer, I'll give a great example. A good friend of mine, he's the head of programmatic over at an agency, and he said, the technology that he has used, and this was a few years back, a lot of it was the keyword targeting. And I think some tragedy happened. There was some terrorism event, really something really bad happened around that time. And he's Muslim. He was told to block the keyword Muslim. And you think as an individual, what that would do to you is pretty big, right? And that's technology saying, well, block any article relate with the keyword Muslim in it. And we all know that's complete bull, right? How can we get over that, and how can we build technology to overcome those types of issues?
I mean,
sensitivities, right? Because it's, highly sensitive. It could really upset a large portion of people.
I mean, if you look at the block list and allow list, like terms like gay and lesbian are still often blocked, right? And that's like to your point, that prime example. I think technology is a reflection of our biases, right? Again, technology is a facilitator. It's only as good as how it's set up. It's created by humans. It's always going to have that bias, all the way down to, I remember watching a keynote once where, one of those like doctor apps, depending on if you're male or female, when you put your symptoms in, you'd get a different diagnosis because there was inherent bias that went into it that showed that if women showed certain symptoms, it was generally reflective of something else. And that's where it gets dangerous. And it's really hard I don't have the silver bullet. I wish I did. But I don't know how we kind of remove that. The only way is to continue this education journey and hope it iterates over time. But it's really difficult because it does exist in all of this.
I think that's exactly it. We just have to continually challenge our biases, right? And that's not an easy thing to do. That's something that can't always be done necessarily through introspection and internalizing. So we kind of need to, and that's one of the reasons why the foot really needs to remain on the pedal of constantly challenging us as an industry within our own various corners of the industry, within our own businesses, and tapping into that general challenge that's coming from society. Because if we take our foot off that accelerator, we'll lose the momentum and we'll just give in to our natural biases. And because you know what it's like, you always default to doing things the way that you've done them before or whatever. And again, if we row back even 5-6 years, it would have been perfectly commonplace to have a lot of terms on block and exclusion lists that just are not acceptable anymore. And that's a really short period of time. So yeah, and I think, so how do we sort of tackle that from a tech point of view? My hope again is that putting a lot of hopes into this podcast rather than solutions, but my hope is that the thing that I love about advertising technology and marketing tech is it's a very sort of innovative corner of the industry, of the advertising and marketing industry. And I just hope that we put a lot of effort into tech innovation to continue driving forward to solve some of these challenges. And it's getting back to the stuff that we've talked about at the start of the podcast, the authenticity that we know that brands are seeking, the ability to just continually challenge our perspective of what diversity means and make sure that is a genuinely authentic message. And I think if we can develop tech tools from that point of view that help us deal with targeting, reaching particular audiences and our understanding of how to do that, we'll unpick some of this. There is always going to be, I think, though, a very fine line, right? Because the whole point of tech and automation is that it takes off at a pace at which humans don't necessarily always operate at. So I think it's going to be a challenge. And, artificial intelligence, use and adoption of AI tools, which is becoming a challenge in and of itself, I think is going to give us some other causes for reflection. But yeah, we really need the human element to continue pushing our biases.
And regulation, ultimately.
Yeah.
Obviously AI, machine learning, it's a big topic this week. A lot of conversations around the benefits, the use cases of AI, predictive, generative. And yes, no brand wants to be left behind in that space, but to think that you can press the green button and the AI is going to do the work for us and take the human bias, because ultimately it's a machine or algorithm, completely wrong. It needs to be regulated, to your point, which will need the human aspect still needs to be there to assess whether we are really accurate with our targeting and we're speaking to the right people in the right way.
Yeah. And I wonder sometimes if the regulation element, sometimes if I think about cornerstones of change in the industry, I find myself wondering, is it regulation that's driven us there because we're now required to do things differently, or is it more of an altruistic desire to do things differently?
Yeah,
Sorry, Ben.
I think on the topic of AI, there was something I was reading not too long ago by an assistant professor at IE University in Spain. Maria Alez, I believe her name is. Forgive me if I pronounced that wrong. But she did a piece which I honestly found fascinating. AI is only going to become more and more dominant in our space and within our industry. And it already has its own biases. It's some of the feedback that the AI has had so far, which is it is slightly biased because of the people who have built it. Now, the issue and what she wrote about, which I thought was really fascinating, was there isn't an issue with the product. It's an issue with who develops the product. And that stems all the way back to STEM as an industry, which is, do they have enough women at the forefront of these industries? Are there enough women in tech or in mathematics or science or, all these things that help develop AI tools? They aren't involved at an early enough stage to be able to influence the biases that are already there. So we can try and fix them now, but it doesn't fix the long-term issue. We need to get more women and, people from other communities involved in this. So when you have those initial conversations about how the tool works, the bias is already gone.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be there to start with and then fixed later on.
Can bias, again, a bit contentious, can it ever be gone? I guess I
don't think it will.
Even like AI is artificial intelligence, right? It's replicating the intelligence that humans have. We all have our biases. Some of it's unconscious bias, and we've done training on it, and you don't even know that it's happening. It's a nice idea that will remove it completely, and that's we'd want to get to that point. But is it more about recognizing the biases and trying to control that?
Mm-hmm.
Because no one's perfect. I find myself doing it, and I catch myself now, and I'm more aware. But they're not removed, and because you can't remove it necessarily from a human in its entirety, is it too far-fetched to suggest we can move it away out of something that's created by humans, essentially? So
it's a natural human characteristic, right? So that's why I think we just need to constantly challenge ourselves on our biases, consistently ask ourselves whether those are reasonable biases or whether they're not, and whether they can be removed or not, and just challenge our understanding of the way things operate. And to your point, man, I imagine a time when we might not need to think so deliberately about how to encourage certain people into certain industries could be a time when maybe at a very young age, kids are able to seek out their preferences just based on their own preferences, not based on things that they've been encouraged to do because society tells them they should do it, or because, gender stereotypes tell them they should do it, or because, ethnic stereotypes tell them they should do it. If we lived in a world like that, then we'd get more people just sort of naturally filtering into the things they're interested in, and as a result, more diverse workforces in our industry.
It should be organic, right?
That's
Which
right.
is the thing. It's not I think the purpose of what we need to do for our younger generation is not dictate what they should do. It's
100%.
show them that there are all these opportunities that they can do, and it's their own personal choice which way they would like to go, which industry they want to work in, etc. But maybe we haven't had that in the past, where it was this job is for a white male, or this job is for etc. etc. So we need to create that opportunity and show that this is available for the next generation coming through.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think talking about the technology in particular, I think the resurgence of contextual has played a big part in eliminating some of these biases, because with contextual advertising, it's not around the individual, right, and what they've done, where they've been, tracking them, because it's just simply not possible now with the drop of the third-party cookie. But what contextual does, it's about that moment, what is being consumed, right? And that person that's consuming that could have any different background, male, female, whatever age, whatever cultural background. And I think that's the role that contextual plays. And we've seen that, right? We've seen technology companies or publishers pivoting towards contextual because, one, it's a scalable solution, but two, we eliminate these biases. So, you're eradicating a lot of these issues that are in the industry. And have you seen that as well from the Microsoft advertising and the tech side? With the death of the third-party cookie, are you seeing a big push towards contextual or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very slow death. It's not as quick as I would like. And I actually think we've been encouraging our brands to not wait for the deadline, or, tech vendor X is going to set the deadline for the deprecation of third-party cookie. That's a weird place to be. So we've been pushing contextual solutions for the last year, because by the time the deprecation of the third-party cookie happens, you should have a complete other strategy that works for you. And a lot of that's based on context. And I think we did a lot of education in the market that context isn't, dusting off business plans from 15 years ago. some of the stuff like you guys are doing and some of the other partners, it's advanced contextual stuff. And when we look at the performance, you know, we can start to look at something that resembles the same performance, if not better, that we get from when we use a cookie in a privacy safe manner that's future proof. It's harder to replicate. It's very specific to the brand. We find brands are getting really, really excited about it. I think the challenge with context is distilling what your offer is into a really palatable way to understand, okay, this is what, you know, vendor X has, this is what vendor Y has, this is why it works for me and my industry, this is why something else works. And we've been taking clients on that journey. They've been really interested to go on it.
Definitely. So penultimate question. So what excites you guys most about our industry? And I'll start with you, Ritu.
I'm going to be old school and say
Go on.
people. And actually, just to build on the people point, it's the intersection of people and technology, ultimately. So I got into this business because of people. I studied anthropology at university. I was really always very interested in people, how we evolve, why we do what we do. And I think a lot of organizations, I mean, it starts with that, right? And all the technology is developed as a result, and it's a two-way street. It's developed because of how we consume, and we consume because of the way the technology is developed. So I think seeing that grow and continue to grow at pace, and especially like the pace, there'll be some conspiracy theories, amongst us in terms of the leapfrog that's happened, if that's a term, in the technology space, how we consume. And I was talking about it with a colleague just yesterday, actually. Again, to the point where there's young parents here with young kids, and we're thinking about the future for them and how they're going to consume, what jobs are they going to have, what capabilities do they need to survive in the world that's, in front of us. But then I look back, and as a child of the 80s, and I think about the change that technology has driven for consumers, and it's incredible. So I'm not as scared as I was, before I had this conversation for my 2-year-old. I think that we will continue to adapt as a species, and the technology will move at the speed and pace at which it needs to. And I think that I'm pretty positive about where this is headed. And I'm still happy to be working in this industry because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with a lot of Rita said. I think that what's fantastic about this industry is the pace and volume of change and innovation. So it's an industry where no one's shy of discussing how we're going to do things differently, or how we need to innovate, or how we're going to shake everything up. There's a lot of, if I think about the tech side of advertising and marketing, say 10 years ago, it looked completely differently. Never mind our lives, 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I feel like we've got the creds and the skills within the industry to do some really fascinating, exciting things. And we are working in marketing and advertising after all. So from the point of view of some of the issues or some of the, topics we've been discussing today around diversity, we've got a real opportunity to influence the way people think and feel about things. That's what marketing and advertising does. And so I think when you marry those two things together, the sort of, the art and of marketing and advertising with the science of all the tech tools makes for a really exciting industry. And we could do some super exciting, fascinating things with it.
Definitely.
I think for me, I'm just excited to see it change at pace. I think our industry is really interesting because in some ways we move really fast and we're nimble, and in some ways we hang on to the legacy for way too long. And I think what we're seeing, and I haven't been around for another generation really to see it move, but we're seeing a very different type of consumer. The consumer is also the sort of person working in the industry. I think the ideas and innovation that they're going to bring, and a different way of doing things, I'm really excited to see our industry. For example, Cannes. I think Cannes will look really different in 5 years. When we talk about, the culture of the industry, what it's built around, I think that's going to change quite a lot. And I think Cannes is a great place. We talk about context. The conversation you have in Cannes, because of the environment, is so good that it's so important to the industry. But I think the vibe of the place is going to change. And I'm really, looking forward to seeing that in 5 years. How different is it? And hoping that it is very different and reflective of, the people we're trying to capture as brands and advertisers.
Yeah, for me, I think that the most exciting part is the automation and the AI side really developing. The amount of, as you touched upon, the amount of things that have changed in tech over the last 10 years is phenomenal. So where are we going to be in 10 years' time again? You know, I've gone through in my like 13 years in digital, how many changes there's been, and there was the kind of old school way of we're here to do a job and we are going to make every single individual change ourselves. But I think it really changes the dynamic of what we do as marketeers moving forward, where we aren't doers anymore. We need to become thinkers, and we need to, AI and automation will do a lot of the work for us, but that means that we need to start thinking outside the box and developing at a more strategic level. And I think that's going to bring out a brand new wealth of people within the industry.
Definitely. And I'm being told off, but quickly, in the interest of time, we always finish off our podcast episodes with the guests answering this question. But if you had a superpower in AdTech, what would it be? And I'll start with you, Ben.
I mean, in an ideal world, what would be great is there's no online click fraud or anything like that. For me, I think that would be perfect. Something that costs billions of dollars every single year would certainly make life a little bit easier. So yeah, that
would be your superpower.
Yeah, if I could just not have
eliminate
fraud.
fraud. What a
fraud.
superpower.
Yeah.
It's great, isn't it?
That sounds good. Go for it, Rita.
The ability to predict trends and make them useful and real before anybody else, and then I'd get the competitive edge and be at the forefront and make a lot of money. Yeah,
always good.
So my superpower would be, in any meeting, it would just automatically, what everyone's saying would be simplified down. So I feel like our industry, we love acronyms, we love to make ourselves sound smart in front of other people. Sometimes we don't ask the questions because of fear of feeling like, you know, you're not understanding where everyone else is, where in truth everyone else is. My superpower would be that everyone just has to talk as they would with their mates when they're explaining something in a really simple way. And I think we'd get so much further ahead because we'd stop the guesswork and we'd get...
And getting rid of egos, right, as well. I think that's there's a lot of egos in our industry. I think one of my previous episodes mentioned that. And I think, yeah, getting rid of these egos and just simplifying everything, it makes the world better.
And the acronyms feed the egos.
Of course.
Well,
of course.
exactly. And so that was going to be mine. I was thinking, you know, Karen, what you're talking about there is almost like an instant translation service, right? That it could be this universal sort of translation service that we could all instantly understand each other. But mine was definitely the good old TLA, the 3-letter acronym. The industry is just built on it. And I have to say that at the opening panel at ATS London this year, it was mentioned.
Really?
Someone said, if we could just get rid of that. And I'm thinking 10 years ago, we said the same thing. If we could just stop speaking in 3-letter acronyms, my superpower would be to just be able to decipher those 3-letter acronyms, because I still sit in meetings thinking, is that what I think it is, or is that something else? So
that is not just me.
No, definitely not.
I spent way too much time on Google then Googling those 3 letters and finding every other word under that thing.
Getting some...
Or Bing. Don't forget about Bing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. No, thank you. Thanks everyone for your time. It's been great, and thank you to all of our audience that are listening back on YouTube. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.